What's happening across the Commonwealth of Virginia is just like in 2021. Virginians are coming together. And it's not just Republicans. It's independents. It's Democrats.
I think it's important as women to keep, fighting for our rights. And I feel like issue 1 is for our rights.
Mississippians are ready to see the change for a better in Mississippi. And they're ready to turn the page, ready for a breath of fresh air.
I'm Ed O'Keefe, CBS News in Washington. Welcome to the Day America Decides. In a special election night edition of this program, tonight Americans are deciding across the country elections up and down the ballot that directly affect local communities and big states. Voters are deciding on an abortion rights measure in Ohio, for example, with exit polls telling us what they think about the issue. And in Virginia, the Old Dominion's entire state legislature is up for grabs and could help determine if its Republican governor has a bigger political future beyond the state. And in 2 other southern states, Kentucky and Mississippi, they're electing governors tonight. CBS News Executive Director of Elections and Surveys, Anthony Salvanto, joins us now. Anthony, good to see you again. What are we seeing in the exit polls out of Ohio so far?
Hey again, Ed. Okay. People so far, and remember, polls are still open, so they're still voting. But so far, when you ask in the exit poll, how do you feel about the overturn of Roe v. Wade, which, of course, sent this back to the states, right? Well, a minority of people are satisfied or enthusiastic about it, but you get a majority. You get 60% right here that are dissatisfied or angry about the overturn. Now, does that mean they want to enshrine abortion rights in their Constitution? Not necessarily. But if you're on the pro-abortion rights side and you're reading the tea leaves, maybe you're looking at that exit poll so far and thinking that could be something. And then this, right? This is a state that Donald Trump won, but you've got a 7-point edge so far on voters saying they trust the Democratic Party to handle the issue more than the Republican Party. When I talk about a state that Donald Trump won, let me show you the map of that. He won this fairly easily, right? So it's going to be kind of a tale of 2 races tonight because I'm going to be watching whether the patterns of vote when they come in at 7:30 look more like this, like the 2020 heavily Republican Ohio, or if they look like Special Issue 1, which was held this summer, seen by a lot of people as kind of an advance vote on this measure, and the no side, which was considered the pro-abortion rights side, won fairly easily, 57%. So which of these 2 races I just pointed out is the one that the vote patterns tonight look the most like? That's going to tell you the story as we go forward after 7:30, Ed.
And in fact, if we look at this map here, the red counties are the bluer parts of the state.
That is right. We can do this. Watch.
Cleveland, Cincinnati, Columbus, that part of the state is big population centers is where they may run up the vote.
Big population centers and also counties that if we're old enough to remember all the way back to like 2012 when Obama did better in the state, these were the counties that voted Democratic. So maybe there's some ancestral Democratic voting there. These are the counties that if you look back at the 2020 presidential race are a little bit lighter shade of red. They voted for Trump, but not as much as some of the other deeply red in the part of the state. So maybe there's some evidence there that there's some folks who might still vote for the abortion rights side, even if these days they vote for Republicans for state office. That's one of the things that the pro-abortion rights side and Democrats may be hoping at.
Earlier, turnout is on par with last year's midterms, right?
That is a great question. I'm glad you raised it. Our latest estimate from right here at the decision desk is 3.9 million. For context, that is about 90, maybe even 95% of the 2022 midterms. What that tells you is that people are motivated by this, right? You get a special election in an off year that comes close to a midterm electorate. Well, certainly if you're on the abortion rights side, you were hoping to gin up turnout, right? The Democrats certainly were. But we also see that there are very Republican counties who so far today, as we've been tracking it, have also raised their turnout, raised it relative to that August special election. So, the Republican side, the anti-abortion rights side, they're coming out too, all of which, portends well, it might portend well for them. That's the pattern we see so far, Ed.
Smells like a good contest, doesn't it?
Well, so far it does. But it's always interesting when you start to see turnout go up. And then the other part of this is how much of it is today. Because we think there's going to be, I'll write it over here, 900,000 advance votes. People voted by mail, people who voted, early. And what happens is this vote tends to come in first and it tends to be more Democratic or on the pro-abortion rights side. So when the votes do start coming in, you might very well see that yes vote start to spike. But I'm going to tell you here, I'm going to tell you at 7:30, hang on, because Election Day, more Republicans vote, some of those other rural counties are going to come in, and we're going to have to wait to see what the size and direction of that Election Day vote is. That's kind of how you watch Ohio, Ed.
And the polls close when?
7:30 Eastern. So we're
in
looking
about
at
24 minutes or so. 25 minutes, give or take.
Hour and a half.
So I'm sorry.
No, it's okay.
You know what? You're the executive director of elections, and I'm not.
This is the big thing you got to do in the job. Keep track of the hours.
A lot of math.
Exactly.
Anthony Salvanto, he does it all very well. We'll check in with you in a little bit. And as we mentioned, voters in Ohio are voting on a ballot measure that, if approved, would enshrine access to abortion services in the state's constitution. Abortion rights groups are hoping to extend their winning streak in Ohio tonight after succeeding in all 6 other states where similar measures related to the issue of abortion access have been on the ballot in the last year. CBS News national correspondent Jerika Duncan joins us now from Columbus. Jerika, great to see you there in Ohio's state capitol. Remind us specifically, what is on the ballot tonight? What is it that Ohio voters are deciding on?
So this is issue number 1, and this really comes down to enshrining a woman's right to an abortion, a legal right. This is the first time that a measure like this has been taken up before voters. We're talking about changing, or adding, I should say, to the state's constitution to protect this right. It's why it's so critical for many people here. As you probably recall, back in 2019, the Republican Governor Mike DeWine signed a heartbeat bill into effect, and that was for 6 weeks. Now, that ban did not include protections for rape or incest. As soon as Roe v. Wade was overturned, that took effect, but then it was paused, and it currently is still paused. So pro-abortion rights advocates that I've spoken to said that they're concerned that if this measure does not pass, that ban could potentially take effect sooner than later. Again, we did speak to Governor Mike DeWine, and I asked him about what would happen if this measure is passed. Take a listen.
In the history of the state, I don't believe there's been one example of a constitutional amendment that has been put in by referendum, which is what this is, that has been then changed again by the people. So as a practical matter, this will end the debate or make it very difficult, at least, to change that. If, in fact, it is defeated, then we will have the opportunity to try to get something that is closer to where the majority of Ohioans are.
Yeah, so as you heard him mention there, he's acknowledging that if this is defeated, that it actually will become, the law will ensure those protections that we talked about in terms of enshrining this as a legal right because of this amendment to the state constitution. But I can tell you that there will be a fight. And I think even those who support this amendment say even if it does pass, they expect to hear or at least see some efforts, as they have seen over the last 10 or 15 years in this state, to limit access to abortion. But we did speak again to voters and leaders on both sides of this discussion, and I want to just play some of that sound as well.
These are very personal medical decisions. They should not be decided by the government. Politicians in Columbus do not understand what's going on in an emergency room.
What issue 1 is about it's about cementing late-term abortion in Ohio's constitution and taking away parental rights. So when we talk to Ohioans, issue 1 just goes too far, whether they're pro-life, pro-choice, or somewhere in between.
So turnout is expected to be higher than normal. The Secretary of State acknowledged just a short while ago that over 860,000 people partake in early voting, and they're expecting about 60% of the people who voted today to represent the rest. The proposed amendment, again, to enshrine, to codify a woman's right to a legal abortion. The polls close here at 7:30 in Ohio. Ed?
Jerika, all eyes on the Buckeye State tonight. We're glad you're there for us. We'll be talking to you later on. Take care for now. We're also closely watching Virginia tonight. Although he's not on the ballot, the Old Dominion's Republican Governor Glenn Youngkin is hoping his party can regain full control of the state legislature. Here's his final pitch to voters.
We've delivered, and we ask you to extend our license to lead, help us hold our House, flip our Senate, and send me a team that'll work with me in Richmond, not against me, and we will bring Virginia to new heights.
CBS News Chief Election and Campaign Correspondent Robert Costa joins us now. Good to see you, sir. Balance of power is up for grabs in Virginia tonight, but the political future of that guy may also be on the ballot tonight.
There's been some terrific reporting done in recent days, including by Molly Ball at the Wall Street Journal, about how Youngkin's trying to set up a framework for how Republicans can articulate a position on abortion for 2024. Youngkin and Virginia Republicans have taken this position on a 15-week ban. And this is different than what we've seen in Florida, and you've covered so well with Governor DeSantis with his 6-week ban. If Youngkin wins tonight in terms of his allies winning the Virginia Senate, winning the Virginia control of the legislature, it could set a precedent for how Republicans move forward on this issue, willing to talk about abortion, but only willing to go so far in more blue states or states President Biden won.
And we should remind voters, viewers, this is like a off year election. This is something where mostly the most rabid of voters show up, and otherwise it's a kind of a sleepy set of contests because it's just the legislature. But the governor has turned this into not only a statewide, but really a national contest, in part because he's trying to load test the theory on abortion for Republicans. $150 million plus spent on a handful of races, essentially in suburban Washington and suburban Richmond. He's putting a lot on the line here tonight if this doesn't go his way.
Well, Virginia Republicans and national Republicans want to do well in Virginia because they know even if it's just one state, it's often going to be interpreted by donors nationwide, by Republicans, as a sign of enthusiasm or a lack thereof ahead of 2024. So it's understandable the parties want to do well in Virginia. And this is a state that Republicans want to start to climb back in politically. And Youngkin is someone who's been recruited to run for president, though I just spoke with New Hampshire Governor Chris Sununu, and he said it's probably too late. But that hasn't stopped people from saying to Youngkin, maybe you should think about getting in. And Youngkin, I think, even if he doesn't run in November or December, he's going to hover, like a few other Republicans, as someone who could run toward the convention should former President Trump ever get convicted next year and there's a full crisis in the Republican Party. But at this point, so many Republicans are willing to accept former President Trump, even if he is convicted, that it's not clear that that moment would ever come where the party would say we really need to take a break from Trump.
Yeah. Beyond Virginia, what are you looking at tonight?
I always like to pay attention to my home county, Bucks County, Pennsylvania, and the Montgomery County, the Philadelphia collar counties, because they're having county commissioner elections tonight, municipal elections, and Pennsylvania, with its judicial races, its county races, really could be a flashpoint about where Pennsylvania is going to go in 2024.
You're going to elect a new mayor in Philadelphia, most likely tonight, right? There's no runoff there. Cheryl Parker could potentially be the city's first female mayor. You're in that area. You can always watch CBS Philadelphia, of course, for more on that.
KYW3.
That's right. You also mentioned Chris Sununu and Molly Ball. Both of them are coming up. But first, access to abortion was a key issue at the ballot box in 2022. We will get the latest exit poll data from Ohio on this and ask Molly Ball and another reporter, Nancy Cortez, who are closely tracking this issue, if Democrats can rely on it to mobilize voters again this year. You're streaming America Decides.
I'm of an age that I know what happens if you can't do this legally. So, it was like a no-brainer for me.
I remember what illegal abortions are like. They're not good. I'd rather have women have a choice.
Some of the sound of voters in Ohio. Welcome back to America Decides. Access to abortion care is on the ballot in Ohio tonight and remains on the minds of voters nationwide. A new CBS News poll out today finds 74% of Americans are concerned pregnant women may be more at risk in areas where abortion is mostly illegal. 60% are concerned maternity care centers and hospitals could close. With that in mind, Nancy Cortez and Molly Ball join us now. Nancy, of course, CBS News Chief White House Correspondent. Molly, a newly minted senior political correspondent at the Wall Street Journal, a longtime chronicler of all things political in this country. Good to see both of you. This abortion measure tonight, Nancy, not only a very big deal in Ohio, but being watched so closely by Democrats, by abortion pro-abortion, anti-abortion advocates across the country, because if it happens in Ohio, such a big battleground state in the past, the thinking is it could be quite effective for either side of the argument going forward into next year.
Right. We know that abortion was an animating issue last year, right? We saw special elections. We saw a variety of measures either aimed at expanding abortion access or restricting it. All of those went the Democrats' way, and the way of people who want more abortion access. So the question tonight is, does that continue to be the case in Ohio? Because if it does, that is a sign that it could be an animating force next year as well in the general election. That's what obviously the Biden White House is hoping, because there isn't anything else that has been as motivating for Democrats to vote. And the president's poll numbers, as we've recently seen, are soft. In Ohio, in particular, what they're voting on is a constitutional amendment that would basically protect abortion access. Doesn't mean that eventually the state couldn't restrict access to abortion after the point of fetal viability. We're talking about 21, 22 weeks potentially, but that's a lot different than the bill that the governor, the Republican governor of Ohio, signed a few years ago that would cap it at 6 weeks.
And it's also very different than what's going on in Virginia, where you have the Republican governor, Glenn Youngkin, leaning into this issue and being far more specific than many of his Republican colleagues across the country about when he thinks abortion should be permitted and why, and talking about it quite openly in a handful of these legislative races across the state.
That's right. I mean, I think it's important to remember what a rapidly shifting landscape this is. It's only been a year and a half since Roe v. Wade was overturned, and so both parties have been grappling with that and struggling to find messages that resonate and positions that voters are comfortable with, particularly swing voters. And of course, especially Republicans, right, who have been on the wrong end of, even in red states like Kansas and Kentucky, but they've been on the wrong end of this issue. There is a school of thought, and it is the Glenn Youngkin school of thought, that Republicans should not avoid this issue. That when you avoid it, it just allows Democrats to depict Republicans as wanting to ban all abortions. He's saying, I'm for a 15-week limit. I'm going to argue that that is a moderate position. And it is the case that 90+% of abortions occur before the 15 weeks. The polling on this is very slippery depending on how you ask the question, but they have polling that suggests a majority of voters may view this as a moderate position. And so he's trying to say, I'm going to tell people where I stand, I'm going to be clear about this, and maybe I can sell it. Now, depending on how it turns out tonight, it may be the opposite. It may be that voters look at that clarity and say, well, actually, we're against it, no matter how clearly you articulate it. Virginia is a bluish state. It has gone for Democrats in the last 4 presidential elections, went for President Biden by 10 points. And I think there's a lot of skepticism about whether the electorate, whether particularly suburbanites and swing voters, will go for any kind of further limitation on abortion than what's already in place.
I think the fact that Youngkin has been so adamant that his proposal is a limit, using that word limit and not a ban, is a sign of the way that abortion politics and the lingo are really changing as both parties try to own this issue. Republicans realize that the term ban is not popular. Right. Who wants to be banned from doing something that they were able to do before? And so limit is a more palatable term. On the Democratic side, you often hear advocates using the term reproductive freedom or abortion access because they realize that there are people out there who might not personally be interested in protecting abortion rights, but they might be open to it for someone they know and love.
And while Democrats writ large are watching both of these states for signs, the irony is that the 2 biggest statewide races, Kentucky and Mississippi, have Democrats who support abortion restrictions on top of the ballot. Andy Beshear has said he is in favor of restrictions, except with the exceptions of rape, incest, life of the mother. And then Brandon Presley down in Mississippi calls himself a pro-life Democrat from the womb to the end of life, suggesting that it's not only about, and this is the interesting argument, not only about restricting abortion, but getting better access to health care so you can live your life, which I thought was a creative way of talking about this. But you're not going to necessarily be able to glean as much from those 2 states, given that the Democrats are supportive.
Although if you look at the new CBS News poll that just came out today, what it shows is that even people in these very red states are concerned about medical care going away, are concerned about women's health, are concerned about the fact that it's getting more dangerous potentially to have a baby in this country. It's really striking that that is the majority of Americans, even in red states like the two that you're describing.
And Kentucky, of course, one of those states where a referendum that would have more or less banned abortion was rejected by voters last year. There is a ban in place that Beshear does not support, and he has campaigned. You're right. He is another politician trying to fashion a moderate lane on this issue, but he has definitely defined himself as the more pro-abortion rights candidate in this race, and he definitely has sought to use that as an issue against his Republican opponent.
In fact, there's an incredible ad he ran that put the Republican Daniel Cameron back on his heels because it had a woman who had been raped by her stepfather who said, "Would you really want me to have to carry that baby to term having that happen?" And that forced Cameron to have to tweak his position, which is kind of exactly what Democrats are hoping to see happen to Republicans across the country. Anything else you guys are watching tonight? Quickly while we have you.
Medicaid. I think that's another big animating issue in Mississippi alongside abortion is that, again, another issue where even folks in red states are saying we'd like access to these federal dollars to expand Medicaid. And the Republican governor there has held the line. We'll see whether that hurts him tonight.
And I'll be watching Glenn Youngkin. He is someone who, as Costa has reported, is very personally popular, and a lot of Republican donors really like him and would like to see him have a future on the national stage. But he's taken a big gamble by putting himself in the middle of all of these races, trying to pull these Republican candidates over the line. We'll see if it's a favorable political environment for him. But he, as the Democratic leader of the caucus in the House of Delegates told me, that he thinks he's cracked the code, but he's going to get his head cracked. So if that happens, it could tarnish the pristine Glenn Youngkin political brand.
We shall see. That is arguably the most intriguing political storyline to watch tonight. Nancy Cortez and Molly Ball, thank you for being here. And a reminder, at 8 p.m. Eastern, Nora O'Donnell anchors special coverage of Election Night. Nora will be joined by yours truly, plus Nancy, Anthony, Bob, and Tarika, plus other CBS News reporters and analysts across the country. Join us however you're streaming us right now. Tonight, voters in Kentucky are deciding whether to re-elect the incumbent Democratic governor. What Andy Beshear and his GOP challenger Daniel Cameron are saying about the race. Stay with us. You're streaming America Decides. Welcome back to America Decides. We're getting a sense of how Ohio voters feel about the issue of abortion, voting on a ballot measure that, if approved, would enshrine access to abortion services in the state's constitution. Joining us now again, CBS News Executive Director of Elections and Surveys, Anthony Salvanto, who has a bit more exit polling data. He has taken off the jacket, which means he's diving into numbers. What do you know, Anthony?
Hey there, Ed. Yeah, look, it's at a Republican state, Ohio. But look at this. When asked which party do you trust more to handle the issue of abortion, the Democratic Party is up 49-42 as of now with these Ohio voters. Voting is still going on. Republicans might be voting later, and these numbers could change. I want to emphasize that. But that, if you're reading tea leaves, maybe that's good for Democratic turnout so far. And then this, how do people feel about the overturn of Roe v. Wade? The enthusiastic or satisfied with it is a minority percentage. The majority dissatisfied or angry about it. Again, still going on, but that's the latest. And again, for context here, Ed, this is a map of Ohio 2020. This is a red state. It's a state Donald Trump won comfortably. But this is some indication, as we saw last summer, that there may be at least some Republicans who aren't entirely in favor of more abortion restrictions. And that's what the pro-abortion rights side tonight is counting on. We'll keep watching, Ed.
Anthony Salvanto at the CBS Broadcast Center tracking everything for us there. We'll check in later. We should also point out polls have closed in some parts of Kentucky, not the entire state, just some parts of it, as they're deciding who will be the next governor of the bluegrass state. Democrat Andy Beshear, elected 4 years ago by roughly 5,000 votes, faces Republican Daniel Cameron, who's the current attorney general and who many see as a rising star in the GOP. CBS News campaign reporter Torian Small joins us now from Louisville. Torian, that room has filled up a bit more behind you. Give us a sense of how the two campaigns are feeling and what voters had been telling you here in the closing days of the race.
Yeah, the lights have dimmed low. We started to see a rush of voters start to come in. Andy Beshear's campaign has opened up doors. They're expecting a victory tonight, but also the Daniel Cameron campaign is expecting a victory. Both, though, anticipate this would be a hotly, tight, very tight race here, especially considering Beshear won his 2019 bid by just 5,000 votes. But what voters are telling me, especially outside of those precincts that I was at earlier today, they say that they're pretty torn between these two candidates. A lot of voters, Republicans, Democrats, Independents, tell me that both of those candidates, Beshear and Cameron, are good people, in their words. And ultimately, it comes down to the issues. I talked to some Democrats who say the economy is what's keeping them on Team Beshear. One Democrat was a Trump supporter and said that that's part of the reason why she was voting for Cameron this time around. And then Republicans, some culture war issues were really what's driving them to the polls. We saw one man say that his daughter was on his mind, so he liked the fact that Daniel Cameron talked quite a bit about transgender issues, keeping trans athletes out of cisgender sports. So yeah, we're looking at or hearing responses from both sides of the aisle. This is a very tight race. Beshear is looking to lean into his crossover appeal. He was able to win the 2019 election because of his support from Trump voting Republicans. It's to be seen if he's able to keep that momentum in this election.
And Torian, as you know, Beshear won by about 5,000, only about 5,000 votes 4 years ago. Won his AG race 8 years ago by only about 2,000 votes. So that is a team that is accustomed to and equipped for tight races. So could be a long night there in Louisville. Torian, thank you for being with us, and we will check in with you again later as CBS News election night coverage continues. And for more on what's happening in Kentucky and other key races tonight, let's bring in Jessica Taylor and Kyle Kondik. Let's just say these guys know what they're talking about, because Jessica is Senate and Governor's editor at the nonpartisan Cook Political Report, and Kyle is managing editor of the nonpartisan Sabatos Crystal Ball at the Center for Politics at the University of Virginia. I am surrounded by UVA grads in this building, Kyle. Yeah, that's all right. Jessica, though, let me start with you and go back to Kentucky for a second, because Andy Beshear's got about a 65% approval rating, a great example of a governor having his own political identity, which is often what these governors' races are about, not national issues so much as statewide issues.
Yeah.
And yet we've seen Republican Daniel Cameron try to paint him as a Biden Democrat.
Right. This comes down to Democrats want to localize. All politics is still local, make this about state issues. People call him Andy when they see him. He's been there in the state. He got high marks for handling the COVID crisis, for natural disasters. They had floods and tornadoes in the state. He showed up to a lot of these rural areas, and you've seen Republicans, at least early on, try to hit him on transgender issues, tying him to Biden. His approval ratings haven't taken a dent. Now, am I surprised that the polls in the final days have tightened? I'm not, because it's fundamentally a Republican state. And if you talk to anyone in the state, they always expected this to be a close race. But governor's races are sort of the last place where voters, I think, look at it as more of a choice on candidates, in effect, apart from sort of the national partisanship of the state. Because there's no prize for, electing the most governors in the country. Whereas if you're voting for Senate, you're voting for who you want to control Congress. But here you have governors, think of, you had Larry Hogan in Maryland, Charlie Baker in Massachusetts, these sort of unique governors that are able to transcend parties. And with approval ratings like those, we don't typically see a governor lose re-election. A similar one, it was Laura Kelly in Kansas last cycle that also got re-elected. They have very similar profiles. Beshear's name is also very golden in the state. His father was governor, a two-term governor. And so I think it's some of those things that give him an advantage, even in a very red state. But I think both men are really rising stars within the party. They're young. If Beshear wins, I think he's in the mix for 2028, perhaps, looking forward. I don't think he could run for Senate or something like that, and he's tossed that down. But also Daniel Cameron, if he comes close even, he's run a good campaign. If he pulls off sort of what would be an upset, he would be the first Black Republican governor elected in the country. But I think he's also one to watch, win or lose, in Kentucky and beyond.
Because of his ties to Mitch McConnell, among other things. Kyle, down in Mississippi, perhaps the governor's race not getting as much attention, but part of what's so intriguing is that the Democrat, Mr. Presley, has pulled, if not even, certainly closer to Republican Tate Reeves than many thought he could.
Yeah, and look, Mississippi is a very Republican state. It's very racially polarized. You do have a very significant black electorate there, but the white electorate is bigger, and Republicans have generally dominated at the statewide level in recent years. Presley, I think, probably will keep it relatively close, just like Jim Hood, the former Democratic Attorney General, did 4 years ago when he faced off against Tate Reeves in what was an open seat contest. But boy, it's just so hard to get over the finish line as a Democrat in that state. And so, if you're looking for like what would be just sort of really surprising result from tonight, it would definitely be, Democrats winning the Mississippi governorship. There's also the possibility of a runoff in that state, which is a new provision. So it's, there's within the realm of possibility that this one could go to overtime in a few weeks.
And since you are based in Virginia, or at least your entity is, the fact that Glenn Youngkin has thrown himself at these otherwise sleepy legislative races, that's a dynamic we don't normally see a governor try to pull, right?
Well, look, Glenn Youngkin cannot run for a second straight term. Virginia is the only state in the country where a governor cannot run for a second straight term. And I think he really wants to be able to make the most of his last 2 years in office, and he needs a Republican legislature to do that. There are always whispers about Youngkin maybe being a presidential candidate in the future, maybe even this cycle. It'd be a little late to get in now, but you could imagine something like that potentially happening. Obviously, Donald Trump is sort of dominating that race at the moment, at least. Youngkin is another kind of rising star, I think, in politics. But, we'll see if he actually gets to, do his program for the next 2 years if he can get both chambers.
Quickly, since both of you guys track this stuff for a living, what's the other sort of obscure or off-the-mark thing that you're tracking tonight or want to see happen?
I think Kyle brought up the runoff. Are we still here? And also, if this governor's race in Kentucky is very close, they actually just changed the state law there as well. If it's less than half a percentage point, which the last race was, then it's an automatic recount. So we could be in sort of limbo in these races. I'm not entirely certain we'll have calls in either tonight based on how close some of these end up being.
Okay. Kyle, how about you?
There's a Pennsylvania state Supreme Court race tonight, and you think, oh, well, state Supreme Court, who cares? But, Pennsylvania is one of the key swing states in the country. Democrats are going to have a majority on that court regardless of what happens, but there have been some closely divided decisions on voting rights and election administration and those sorts of things. And if the Republicans win tonight, they'll have a stronger hand to play in those decisions going forward. So that's another big one in, again, one of the most important states in the country.
Amen to that, and I'm so glad you brought up that one because it's one of those races that you never know. It may not matter as much tonight, but could very well matter down the line. Jessica Taylor and Kyle Kondik, great to have you both on a big day. Coming up, we'll be joined by two Democratic lawmakers to get their perspective on what might happen on the ballot in their home states. Stay with us. You're streaming America Decides. Welcome back to America Decides. Democrats are hoping this off-year election can boost their party heading into 2024. Two key votes Democratic leaders will have their eyes on tonight are Andy Beshear's re-election bid in Kentucky and the Abortion Rights Protection Initiative in Ohio. So who better to talk to us about that than two people from those states? Ohio Democratic Congresswoman Joyce Beatty, who represents most of the city of Columbus and Franklin County, and Kentucky Congressman Morgan McGarvey, who represents most of what they call Louisville Metro. Not Metro Louisville, Louisville Metro, right? I get that right?
You got it right.
All right.
You
Excellent.
said Louisville right.
Well, I got some family there, so they've taught me right. Election day in both your states, big contests. Congressman, let's start with you. This abortion ballot measure really has drawn intrigue across the country and could set the pace on this issue going forward. You got any sense of what could happen tonight?
Well, we know all eyes are on Ohio, and I feel really good tonight. Early vote, we're up with that. If you compare it, as you know, in August, we had the constitutional issue again about women's reproductive rights. And so here we are now with this election, and I think we're going to do okay in it. I think we're going to prevail. 40% early vote came in, and that's a good number for us. If you look at some of the polls, when you ask the question, are people angry about Roe v. Wade and what happened? A greater percentage. They're angry about it. More women are coming out and voting. We know this is beyond an issue just for women. It's a family's issue. I think we've done a great job in educating all of Ohio about how important this is and what it does in the future. And so I'm very comfortable because it'll make a big difference for Ohio where we are now with the ban on abortion, even if it's rape or incest. So this will put us back where we think we're protecting women's rights.
I'm curious because if people looking outside the state think, okay, this got defeated, abortion rights are going to be enshrined in the Constitution, and you see that big turnout in an off year, should people outside the state think that there's a chance the state's going to go back to being purple or blue after several years of Republican dominance, or is this an issue-specific thing that has turned out the state tonight?
Well, I think it's a combination of both, and as a proud Democrat, I'm hoping it does help have everybody's eyes on Ohio to say that we can once again be more of a purple to blue state.
Congressman Andy Beshear, one of the most popular governors in the state, or in the country, 65% roughly. Daniel Cameron, the Republican opponent, keeps trying to tie him to President Biden, suggesting he's a Biden Democrat. If we can turn out the governor first and then Biden next year will have succeeded. Is that a message I imagine you think it probably doesn't work in Kentucky, or might it tonight?
I don't think it does work. I mean, Andy Beshear has done an incredible job as governor. And when he got sworn in December of 2019, then 3.5 months later, COVID happens. And he is the one leading our state. He's on TV every evening at 5 o'clock. People refer to it as Beers with Beshear. The people in the state know him. They knew his dad when he was governor. They've watched him shepherd the state through natural disasters, great economic development. But also there's an issue for us that's similar to Ohio. You know, Ohio is our neighbor to the north. And as Congresswoman Beatty was talking about abortion, I think abortion is going to play in this Kentucky race as well, because Kentucky is one of the states right now that there are no exceptions. You cannot get an abortion even if you're a victim of rape or incest. That is something that Daniel Cameron has supported. There have been television ads in Kentucky about this issue. I think it's going to move voters tonight as well in Kentucky.
Quickly, if there's a lesson Democrats outside the state can learn from a Beshear victory tonight, it would be what?
Good leadership, good steady leadership, focus on economic development, focus on education, focus on jobs. He's done a wonderful job in that respect. And I think that you're going to see the people of Kentucky respond favorably tonight.
Okay, so you're both Democrats. You're going to be on the ballots next year, I presume. At the top of that ballot is going to be a president right now who, for whatever reason, seems to be wildly unpopular with Americans. What's going on there?
Well, I don't know that he's popular with Americans. You're probably talking about some of the polling results that we've seen. But we could take you back to Ronald Reagan, to Bill Clinton, to President Obama. 18 months before their election, they had less than 50% ratings. Conversely, we can take presidents who at this time had 70-some% ratings, Ronald Reagan, and he lost the election. So I think it's something we have our eye on. And I can tell you that we are putting people over politics. I can tell you we're talking about his track record, and it's unbeatable. When you talk about women, when you talk about what he's done in healthcare, putting that cap on diabetes for insulin, when you think about what he's done for paying back school loans, when you think about workforce development, the economy, getting us through a global pandemic, so many things that we're going to be talking about, and so many things that we know that Americans favor. So we're worried, but not overly.
And even going back to, and just to piggyback on what Congresswoman Beatty is saying, add to that what we felt in the states and what we felt in the cities. You talked about the Kentucky governor's race with Governor Beshear. He has been able to go around the last few years. He's done a great job of it, but he's been able to work on projects that President Biden and the congressional Democrats funded and paid for. It's the Build Back Better plan. It's the CHIPS and Science Act. It is the Inflation Reduction Act. And I think people in our communities are feeling the impact of that investment in our future, in infrastructure, in high-speed internet, particularly in places like Kentucky. They're going to get a chance during the campaign to talk about that record of success. And I think that's going to be more on voters' minds, particularly if he's up against Donald Trump.
But is there something he needs to be doing more of or less of to try to turn those numbers around and at least calm the worries?
I think the numbers will turn around, and I think that's why he has members like us. I have the opportunity to serve on his national advisory campaign, and we're going out and talking about the issues more. But after all, right now, he's running a country during some of the most unprecedented times, the most difficult times, and he's still out there making a difference. So we just have to tell the story more.
Would you guys campaign with him if he offered to come?
Oh, absolutely, I would.
If he comes to Kentucky, I think then he's going to be doing really well. I doubt he comes to Kentucky, but yes, of course I would campaign with him if he came to Kentucky.
You guys reminded me that you have votes late tonight on yet another round of censure resolutions. It seems to be all Congress has been able to do recently, huh?
Well, we're not in leadership leading the country right now after 22 some days of Republicans not being able to come together on a speaker. We now have a speaker, and we are pushing to do the people's work and get back to it.
Have either of you heard from him or his team about what he plans to do? Or
I've not had any direct contact with the new speaker.
Take the meeting if he asked?
Oh, sure.
All right.
Take a meeting. Yeah.
Well, we're glad you took this meeting, and we'll let you get back to that vote later tonight. Congresswoman Joyce Beatty of Ohio, Congressman Norman McGarvey of Kentucky. Thank you both for being here and for being here in person. We appreciate it.
Thank you for having us. We'll come back.
Excellent. Good. Republicans are also weighing in on this week's key elections. Coming up, we'll hear from New Hampshire Governor Chris Sununu on the congressional races and upcoming third GOP presidential debate. Stay with us. You're streaming America Decides. Welcome back to America Decides. Earlier, our colleague Robert Costa spoke with Republican New Hampshire Governor Chris Sununu about tomorrow night's GOP presidential debate and the elections that are underway today. Here's part of their conversation.
So everyone's wondering, when and where are you going to make an endorsement in the Republican presidential primary?
Well, you know, a couple things. I will make an endorsement. I can't even tell you who will be right now. There's a couple top contenders. I'm spending a lot of time with all the different candidates. And I've said this a lot, but I mean it sincerely. I'm trying to get all the candidates to be the best version of themselves in terms of, that political connection, that retail politics. I'm a big believer if you're good at the retail politics, you're going to be a good retail manager, right? Really bring a sense of the individual to the White House. I think there's still a huge opportunity to not have Trump as the nominee. And I'm not so much anti-Trump. I'm just pro-Republican Party. I know he can't win, so we just need to kind of a generational opportunity to move forward. Most voters won't even decide who they're voting for till after Thanksgiving.
You said your short list is down to a couple people?
Yeah.
So who are those people?
Pretty much those that are on the debate stage at this point, right? I mean, there's kind of a natural winnowing down of the process that I think the Republican Party nationally has done a good job with. We'll have 5 folks on the stage. I think the third debate is going to be very, very critical in terms of not just how well they do, but how well it's perceived. You know, where does that conversation go?
But these debates aren't breaking through, Governor. You know that because former President Trump isn't on the stage.
Well, I would argue that they are breaking through for candidates that do. I think Nikki Haley's done very well. I think Ron DeSantis has really held his own nationally in the second place position. Some candidates have kind of surged and faded a little bit. Some that were on the stage aren't on the stage. And I think the most powerful tool and what everybody has said for the last 6 months is as long as the party winnows itself down, which we are. I mean, I think there were 8 or 9 people on the stage in 16 and in 12 at this exact same time. So they're doing a good job winnowing it down. The third debate will be interesting because they're going to have almost twice as much airtime as they had before. Maybe in the first debate they had 10 minutes. They're all 20 to 25 minutes, and they can't come with the same thing. So they have to be more engaging for a longer period of time, maybe go at each other a little more, and I think you're going to have an opportunity there where a couple, rise to the top.
Is it time for Hutchison and Burgum to leave the race if they're not making the debate stage?
If you're not on the debate stage, I don't see the path. I really, they're great. They're 2 of my best friends, frankly. And they've worked hard. They've been great candidates on the ground. But if you're not making the national debate stage, it's hard to find the path at this point. So, those are kind of hard conversations to have. But it's winnowed down. I think the 4 or 5 candidates that are going to be on that stage are going to bring some excitement and dynamicism to the opportunity of saying, hey, look, there's a future here. There's an alternative here. There's a path to winning here. And hopefully they capture that moment. And I think they will. I think it'll be pretty exciting. I mean, the first debate, had maybe 10 or 11 minutes of airtime, tops. This debate will have 20, 25 minutes for each of them. So they got to bring something a little different. They're probably going to be a little chippy, right, as I like to say, going at each other a little bit, which is a good thing. And it will show kind of the opportunity of who's the fighter, right? Who's got the experience in the background, willing to fight, and gives folks a sense of confidence that not only are they going to fight on a primary debate stage, but be able to carry this all the way to November.
New Hampshire's Republican Governor Chris Sununu, thanks for being here.
Thank you, man. This was great. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
We will have special coverage and analysis Wednesday of the third Republican primary debate in Miami. We'll also have a special hour-long edition of America Decides at 5 and 10 p.m. Eastern. Set your clocks. But that does it for tonight. You're streaming CBS News.